But I wanted to start out here with Tucker Smith. You know, nothing has changed about this. It's the same. We always like to start with this, and you can even sort of start talking about the museum in the same way as it used to when we had Mary Roberson over here. So we hung something that was a little bit more abstract on this side on purpose, so that there's that contrast that's set up right from the start. So this is an actual scene that you can see. Of course, it's an artistically, beautifully done version of that. And then this is much more of sort of an imaginative vision of what a grizzly bear is, and maybe gets a little bit more into the spirit of the grizzly bear than seeing a grizzly bear in a field with some trees behind it. So that's what we kind of set up when we had Mary Roberson out here, and so you can continue that in this kind of entry sequence, and just talk about the various ways that we see wildlife and the artists have depicted wildlife. It's not just one style of art, it's all kinds of different things. The main theme, though, of all of these new galleries installations is exploring. We thought that might appeal to our visitors who come to this valley to explore the outdoors, to explore wildlife, to explore nature. And so that's all laid out there on the text. And we've got a nice little intro about what you're going to see. All of those are different galleries that people can explore. And then there are these great icons that in the future will be interpretive labels.
So in future,
right, the future. So let's go in here so people, visitors can walk through, and then we'll let Bronwyn talk.
Okay, so we have a lot of galleries to go through. So I'm going to give a quick introduction here with some other show and tell items, and then we can work through. But as Adam said, there are 6 different galleries that we have rehung, all with different emphasis on them. And so what we have done is visually we are placing you in space and time in a whole bunch of places. So we've got an introduction, a title in all of these 6 galleries, and then we give you a map that shows you where you are and has some historical things going on in it, and then we have a timeline that talks about the art, some of the art that is in this gallery that we're in, and some of the period of time that we're talking about in the text. So each gallery has this. This gallery is the introduction gallery, so we're talking about why are we here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And we historically and contemporarily show you those things. What Adam was talking about in that little entry area is at the bottom of that intro panel, we have 8, now I can't remember, icons. So many of the works in all of these 6 galleries will have text labels with icons that tell you that you're going to be looking at art history, maybe the natural world, maybe a biography, something about a biography of the artist who made it. And they will look something like, this is black and white, not color, something like this. So you will have these icons that give the viewer a clue. Like, what are we talking about? Oh, we're going to talk about the natural world. Oh, we're going to talk about, this is a palette. We're going to talk about the artistic process having to do with this work of art. So these are going to be rolling out in the next month-ish. But for right now, what we have for you are these time and place visual markers for each gallery. So.
Yep. And tombstone labels for each piece. So you have the basic info for each piece. We just haven't gotten the extra supplemental interpretive material out yet. And a lot of these pieces are familiar to you, so it's good. You know, it's the same. They haven't changed that much. And then additionally, we're hoping for longer interpretive parts to be included in the museum app, which hopefully will take over from the audio tour wand. So we won't have a wand and an app. We'll just have one thing. It'll all be on the app. and that can be even more info if people really want to dig deeper and deeper into these works.
And we have little markers that tell you where to get the app throughout the galleries. So we have a little seating area here that right as you come into the galleries, oh, I can get the app and do that kind of thing, or sit and read Adam's book.
Yeah. So we started planning this reinstallation when the book came out. So if you want to review those entry essays at the beginning of each chapter, that will still give you a really good sense of what this is about. It just took us 7 years to actually make it happen. Sometimes it takes a long time. But this gallery, what we really wanted to do was locate you in this place, the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, talk about the impact of art in the national parks, talk about why artists are drawn to this kind of place, talk about wildlife, etc. So you've got some great artwork depicting where we are, with Grand Tetons over here, Yellowstone over there. The 2 paintings from the Gilcrease are set to arrive this month. They were supposed to be here last month, but we had a little issue with timing. So anyway, they'll be here for most of the summer, and we should be able to keep them for quite a while, as in a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years. So we thought it was worth it to really have them here. There aren't animals, except for humans, in the Moran paintings, because he was not a great animal painter, but it still gives you a really good sense of people coming here, and then the role that Moran played in founding the Yellowstone National Park is a really good story, and that kind of plays out in this gallery and in the JKM gallery. So there's lots of great stuff to talk about. We've pulled also from other temporary exhibits that we've had. So the Grand Teton National Park exhibit we had last summer, some of that info will come out and be associated with why did it take so long for artists to be able to come to this side and paint this side of the Tetons, etc. And then we've complemented the historic pieces with other works that depict animals that you might see in this region, or in the case of David Everett, animals that are native to Wyoming. So it's a good kind of Wyoming intro, and then if you move a little bit farther in, of course we can't ever put this away. Everyone's favorite painting is Chief, and this will likely be complemented by the little video of him painting it, which everybody loves so much. So that will be summarized and into a small little section where you can watch that part of the video.
Do you have any other Bateman hanging, any other Bateman piece that's planned to be hanging?
No.
No. So one more little note. Those of you who were wondering what Carrie has been doing for us, this is what she's been doing. Designing, helping design these things. So she says hi to you all. I talked to her this morning. And this is how she's working with us, is on all of this interpretive material. So.
If you were doing a tour, you can start there, and then you can really choose wherever you want to go. The narrative will make sense because it's like these standalone stories that work really well together, and it doesn't quite matter in what order you want to tell them. It will just depend on you and what you find most interesting and what works for you in terms of a flow. What we did out here was to sort of mark the European gallery from the American gallery, is to hang these similar paintings by Landseer and Tate. And there's a really interesting story. Tate was a younger artist in Britain, was clearly, if you look at these, influenced by Landseer. Saw an exhibit of George Catlin's Indian gallery in Paris, I think, and decided to come over to America. So he's got this really interesting history where he's bringing this European tradition to America, and you can see the results of that pretty clearly here. So if you wanted to introduce and give people the lay of the land, you could kind of come over here and then go back. Also, in many instances, we've tried to put a little contemporary kind of spark or something to make you think outside the box in various different places. And so right here we've got Shelley Reed's black and white contemporary version of Edwin Landseer's Stag. You could get people to look at those two really carefully and compare them. Think about on what bottle of whiskey you've seen this particular stag, etc. Insurance companies, golf balls, whatever. after you talk about the parks and where we are, is to come in here and talk about American art history. There's a huge bunch of this is about the history of the American West and the art that was created here, so you could tie that really well into Moran, Ferry, etc., those people who are out there. And what we did in here, again, was have this great map, which shows you the kind of things that we're looking at, really nice introductory text, and then a great timeline with some of the artworks that you'll see while you're in the gallery. We also, there's many different threads that you could talk about. There's definitely a little bit more of talking about Native American history in here. So you've got these birdstones that are the oldest works in our collection, are from southern Michigan and northern Indiana. I always get that. It's not northern Michigan. Anyway, it's connecting southern Michigan and northern Indiana. So that's the oldest work in the collection, and mostly it's here right now to show just how cross-cultural this desire is to create artwork depicting animals. We have some really nice glass display cases that we have purchased and that will be installed in that entryway. And so pretty soon you'll be able to see a whole bunch more Native American artworks, historic Native American artworks in that kind of section, and it can be its own little story. But then in the artwork throughout this gallery, there's also that narrative that you can tell. Along with the decimation of the bison, you can talk about the removal of Native Americans, the reservation period, all that kind of stuff to give people a fuller sense of the West and our role as colonists moving across it, if you want to go in that direction.
And then just like I said before, in each timeline you can see works from this gallery and where they were, when they were painted. And then what we've done is sort of do 3 threads, sort of a world or events, and then some other events that have to do with works that are in the gallery, and then other things which you'll see on all the timelines, how as people, what our changing perceptions were of animals, and how we sort of worked through a whole bunch of different things. So there might seem like there's some strange random things on these timelines, but if you read the parts of those points, they tie together in how we as humans are trying to grapple with our relationship with animals.
So, we won't stop at every single piece, but this is obviously a really important one to start off with, Edward Hicks' Peaceable Kingdom, and this shows a really hopeful vision of what he hoped might happen, especially in terms of our relationship with Native Americans as colonists moved in. Because here's William Penn signing the treaty with the Lenape Indians down here in the corner, and then complemented by this vision of peace in heaven, peace on earth, and you've got these disparate animals living together in harmony. So he was hoping that that would happen. This was a peaceful, hopeful, forward-looking painting as colonists moved across and interacted with Native Americans. Now, that didn't happen, as we know.
How many did he do?
He did over 60 versions of this. We are super lucky to have this. Yeah. Most of the big museums back east have one of these or 5 of these or whatever. So we are really lucky to have this. And this is a really pretty sweet, gentle, nice version of it. If you look through as he got older and maybe a little grouchier about what was happening, the animals get grislier, like gray beards, like me, and grumpier and not as happy. This is really, this is a really beautiful vision of what might happen right here. And as he got older, and that didn't happen. That was
I heard that was supposed to be depicted as his daughter's.
It might be his daughter. It's also, there's a lot of Christ imagery in there with the grapes and the, we can do a whole training on
lion
that
and the lamb.
Yeah. So and then the supplementary stuff, which is the biblical passage from Isaiah, will be up there on the next set of labels that go up. So that's the kind of thing that'll happen. This is like a mini version of the gallery all on one wall. We're going to go from east to west, which is not necessarily chronological, but it's geographical. So on the East Coast, you've got these beautiful visions of nature and some kind of little visions of small animals that were on the East Coast. You have the Hudson River kind of classic vision of wilderness. Then you've got moving west, translating that vision into the west with someone like Albert Bierstadt. And then Sunset and Buffalo usually is a sadder kind of work that's talking about the end of the population of bison. And those become very popular in the 1880s and afterwards, after nearly 60 million bison had been slaughtered.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Can I do one more
Yeah.
little thing? So in each of these 6 galleries, the map also has very different information on it. So a different way of getting visual information about what we're talking about. So you might see the American map in a bunch of galleries, but the stuff on it is different. So in this one, we have more native communities, a bunch of different kinds of wildlife, and more wildlife. We've got the Missouri River, which talks about Lewis and Clark and other, explorer people moving across. We've got wagons and trains. So when we go into some of the other galleries, you can look and go, oh, what are those visual clues that are telling me about this period of time? There might be an airplane and a boat, and there might be cars, and there might be, cities. And so the maps are all also telling this same story that Adam is telling, just in a different visual way.
So as I said, if you go around the gallery this way, which is sort of our intention, you're going to go geographically. So you're starting in the East Coast, so this is called Eastern Wilds. And this is talking about what, at that point, 1850s, middle 1800s, you've got a growing urban population, and there's pockets of wilderness, and how do those people perceive those pockets of wilderness? I like this. This hasn't been out in a long time, if ever. It's pretty early painting for us, 1861, and it reminds me of like the George Catlin and these paintings over here.
Yeah.
So there's still some kind of exploring of the Adirondacks and exploring of those eastern wildlife areas. This is also, what's depicted in here. A nuclear family, a family of deer. You can use those same threads that we had in the previous installation to talk about what did artists depict. Why was that interesting? Why are we interested in looking at a painting of a family of deer? Because it shows us what that deer family looks like, but it's also very relatable to us. Nuclear family. Also popular, especially in the Eastern world, were trophy paintings and still lifes. And so what section from before could you relate to that? When we talked about gender, and we talked about the heroic male, and who was buying these paintings, and what were they for? Mostly, probably, these would have been purchased by men to reinforce a kind of sense of masculine identity in an era when all those gender roles were starting to shift, because you're moving from rural population to an urban population. And all of those normal kind of norms that you had set up before were starting to move and change. So people looked for ways to reinforce that more traditional sense of, this is a manly space, and I've got a trophy painting on my wall. I've got this beautiful still life of all the birds I went out and killed today, etc.
Fish, that wonderful fish one.
Yeah. So and then you can still tell all the great stories that you had about William Merritt Chase and about Pope and Trompe l'oeil. This is a new painting that hasn't been out. We got this at Collector's Circle. There's some really great facts about that will come out. You can still talk about anthropomorphism. And another thread that goes through here is, what were people seeing the wilderness as? How is it being perceived? And a big part of it was people sought rejuvenation in the outdoors, much like we do today. You could get away from the urban sense of alienation from the wilderness by going out into wilderness and having these great adventures. So there was a great sense of recreation that began to develop during this period. And if you couldn't get out into the wilderness, studies still prove today that looking at images of wilderness help alleviate that sense of the ills of urban life. So I read an article recently that said just looking at pictures of animals in wilderness on your phone brings a little bit of that sense of relief from being so disconnected from nature. So we can start talking about that in this section. I always love the story about getting people to look at this and kind of describe what they see, and then let them know what the title is, because it really shifts your whole view of what that painting is, who it was painted for, who painted it, etc. So you've got East Coast over here, and then we're transitioning into, we go back in time a little bit, into Western exploration. So you got Catlin, Audubon. Titian Ramsay Peale was actually one of the first artists to go west and document what he saw. This is a later painting from later in his life, but you can tell that story of the early explorer artists who went out west. You can see how that has developed by the middle of the 1800s into a vision like the Hudson River School, which saw the West, which saw North America as this great continent that was ready to be explored, full of natural resources, ready to be exploited. It was our manifest destiny to possess this great land without really thinking about or caring about the people that already lived on the land. So it's always important to bring that up. There are no native villages in this painting. This is the West as an unpopulated, pristine place where there's just natural resources, all for the taking. So you get that kind of vision coming through here. You get a little bit, like William Jacob Hayes still liked to document what was out there. You can say he was a little bit more highly trained than Catlin, for example. So you've got this development of artistic community in the United States. And then again, like I said, we try to put a little bit of a contemporary pop in each gallery. Prairie dogs are super important to the whole history of the West. And they're still important today, so you can talk about that. We do have a beautiful prairie dog painting from this period, but it's really big. And you can say, like, most people wanted to buy a painting of a bison or an elk or this kind of stuff over here. There wasn't that great a market for prairie dog paintings, so there aren't that many out there. Anyway, so you can weave that into the narrative.
So much better, but then this one catches your eye.
This is a great painting to talk about all kinds of notions about the West. The Wild West, scene of this epic drama that happens out there on the frontier. But also, you can transition from the Hudson River School vision of the West as our manifest destiny to possess, to the transition into people starting to feel a little bit sad about what was happening to the West as the railroad went through, as settlers came through, as Native Americans were displaced onto reservations, as the bison were slaughtered, etc. That whole narrative. You could see that this being a little bit of a sad painting. It's also about, again, the drama of the Wild West. And by the time you get down here, still have great visions of the iconic, American animal, but you got the lost buffalo calf. You have how many millions, one can only guess, and these stories you all are familiar with already. But this is really that tendency that Americans had to mourn something after they had destroyed it. So this, especially this one. And then again, like any time, like that sunset one over there, anytime you get a buffalo painting at about this time with a few scattered animals in it, you can read it as sort of a sad, mournful sort of piece. And the lost buffalo calf, there's some really interesting info that will be on the label, and hopefully in the audio tour about that, and specifically, why that kind of thing happened. So then, it's not all sadness. We still have, you can make a turn into, well, what did people do with the remaining areas of wildlife and wilderness? Artists turned around and celebrated what we had left. So Carl Rungus certainly plays into that picture. Charlie Russell does too. Think about recreation and what we talked about way back there on the East Coast. You got P.R. Goodwin talking about how amazing the West, North America is for recreating in with fun adventures. And then Grace Carpenter Hudson, which you may not be as familiar with, really got to know the Pomo Indians that lived near her town in Ukiah in Northern California. And she spent a great deal of time with these people, and it was a very caring, apparently sweet relationship, and that comes out in her artwork. So this is looking at what was remaining after the frontier closed, and sort of depicting it, celebrating it, etc. And then this William R. Lee is really interesting to me, particularly because of its date, 1947. So that is really late. William R. Lee lived a really long time. So if you compare it to that, the Hayes painting, this is almost 100 years later, and we still have this epic kind of vision of the West as this place of high drama, etc. So you could talk about the way that that's kind of perpetuated, even after all of this stuff has happened. Okay, gotta move faster. Taken the narrative from what was in the Widener, and we've meshed it with the Darwin exhibit that we did about 2 years ago, the evolution of wildlife art. So we've added that story into this stream. So a lot of what we said before in Widener is still perfectly true and accurate in here. You've just got another level of interpretation that you can add into it. On that intro panel, we go really quickly through a series of really complex movements in European thought. But basically, you've got this conflict between Enlightenment versus Romanticism. Enlightenment sees the world in very scientific, rational terms, and that's the way to understand how the world works. And Romanticism sees emotions and nature as very powerful forces, and that you shouldn't deny those. So it's the heart versus the head versus the heart. And you see that coming out in artwork. Enlightenment era science valued sketches like those over there, or artwork like those over there, which are finely detailed, fine-lined renderings, trying to show you what these animals looked like, trying to catalog these vast collections of specimens that European explorers have been bringing back from all over the continent, etc. You've got that coupled with somebody like Antoine Barye, who's going to the zoo and then creating these fantastical battles between creatures that probably never happened in the wild, or he never saw in the wild, but that really is not the point of them. You've got that story happening, and then you've got, of course, where were people seeing these animals? So Barye was seeing them in the zoo. Paul Devos was seeing them in books. He was using biblical stories to be the genesis of what he was painting. You might see them in the Tower of London. You might see them at the Louvre. You might make it up out of your head, as Jerome did. And then this piece hasn't been out in a while, the Wardle. There will be, as a part of the icon labels, something called cultural narratives. And in that will be a bunch of different stories based on mythology. So people were finding inspiration in mythology. And that is the story, as far as we can tell, of Amethystos? Amethystos. And so we can go into that lunch if we want to. Or Bronwyn can tell it really fast.
Well, no, I was just going to also point out all the same stuff is happening on this map and happening in this timeline. So we are going through a period of time where Devos was doing what Adam was just talking about in this painting, and René Descartes was arguing that animals are machines. And we go all the way up past Darwin, which he's going to talk about too, where people were arguing about animal rights. So, and all kinds of other things, Romanticism and, so, and we've got Darwin's ship on here, and we've got Lillefort's studio on the map, and where Rungus and Friese and Kuhner went to school in Berlin. So we've got all the stuff Adam's saying, visually here also, and in time and space.
So, take that, what I just said, and then you meld it onto the Darwin narrative that we had, where he was developing his theories of evolution right in the middle of this time when you had the Enlightenment and Romanticism, not necessarily clashing, but as complementary sort of forces. And so, Joseph Wolff worked directly with Charles Darwin. There was a bunch of artists who did at that time, and that's when the impetus really came to both know the behavior, the anatomy, etc. of the animal that you were going to depict, but also became really important to know that animal's natural habitat and its natural behaviors. That was a whole thing that Darwin brought to light, that depicting an animal in realistic terms did not mean, making some crazy battle up, but maybe making a battle up that might actually happen in an African savanna. So, you got that, and then you can talk about how the big four, Rhiza, Cunard, Lillifors, and Rungus, came out of that tradition, the foundation that Darwin laid for them. And you can also talk about, again, Europeans going out across the globe, colonizing different places. So you get into this kind of narrative with the big four, and then you can talk about Carl Rungus. So you can go straight into the Rungus Gallery if you want. So what we've tried to do is integrate Rungus into this story in a much better fashion. So you've got Rungus in the American gallery over there. You've got Rungus in the European gallery. And one of the funny equations that I like to make is that if you take Charles Darwin and you add George Catlin, you get Carl Rungus. So there's some European, history and thought, and then there's some American exploration drive to go across the frontier, put those things together, and you end up with Rungus. So, there you go. This is a very familiar story to all of you. We brought the pieces, we talked about this a while ago. We brought pieces out that people told me they like to talk about a lot. So we've got self-portrait, early Wyoming. This piece you haven't seen in a while is New Brunswick moose, also early. These different paintings document his early travels. You got a small painting from his first trip to the Yukon that was reproduced in Sheldon's book. You have the Cragmaster, which is a classic early Canadian painting. And through these 5 paintings from 1890 whatever to 1910, you can also talk about how his style has changed. So it was really about 1910 and thereabouts that he started being much more impressionistic, soaking up the atmosphere of New York life. I found a few new facts and I adjusted some of the timelines in here a little bit to move things forward a little bit from what we had said before. And that's all reflected in the labels. He did take some classes from an Impressionist teacher, which I think is on that label, in about 1910. So you can really see those influences starting to come just in this one little section. And then what was the wall that had the Black Bear, Lake O'Hara, and the pack scene. You've got Lake O'Hara, Northern King, and Caribou, and there's some great stories about those that'll be on the longer labels. But the whole story about him wanting to be in the National Academy, them not wanting him to be in there until he started painting landscapes, that all happens right in this time period. We've redated Lake O'Hara from circa 35 to circa 25, which goes much better with the timelines that I've been reading and when he started to win awards for doing landscapes. So everything's moved a little bit up in terms of his timeline and the significant events of his career. You know that dating Rungus is really hard.
Why?
So I try to put, he didn't put dates on his paintings. So a lot of these are circa this or circa that. So there's some play. But that piece, the Caribou, we know is really close to that date because he had a dry point engraving that came out in 1925. So it has to be before that, right? Before, that we could just, if we didn't know that there was a dry point, we had to guess. Northern King, I think there's also a dry point of that. And then this one we dated based on his other awards and stuff that he had been winning. This appeared in a book in 1940. So it's a later black and white painting, but we know that it was done for illustration in a book. So it again flows into this narrative of branching out and doing other things. This is dated on the back, which is super rare, 1938. This we had previously thought it's Wyoming, it must be early. It's not. He painted Wyoming throughout his entire career. So, That's interesting. This one, there's a dry point, 35, so you can really move around in terms of chronology and know these things a little bit more firmly. This one I still don't really know, but my best guess is that it's right in this 35-40 kind of era. And then it's really interesting to come to this piece, which is 1948. They actually painted that on the canvas. And you can talk about the way that we ended the last Rungus Gallery, what was happening to him at the end of his life, maybe having some macular degeneration, having some cataracts, having some trouble seeing certain colors, and those colors then coming out much brighter than they ever did before. So you can find these colors in all of these later works. They're just much more harmoniously blended into the canvases than they are here. He also took that historic trip back to Alaska with Jane and Red Smith in this era. These are stone sheep, which are known to live up in that place. So that trip, his first plane ride, I think it's on our timeline, that he took with Red and Jane Smith, they flew over this territory. It reminded him of that trip he'd taken up north in 1904, and so he went back to that subject matter. So that's a really fun way to tie this up. If people say you shrunk the Rungus Gallery and they're disappointed about that, you can say that there are 75% more Rungus paintings out now than there ever were before. So
It's not a joke.
there were about 40 before, and now there's about 60. And in part that's because of this, right? So, and this is one part that when artists or other people come to visit, they always want to go in back and look at the landscape studies. This is part of the collection that doesn't get out that often. So we thought that we would just do this amazing grid that Ray did, thank you so much, of landscape studies surrounded by, surrounding finished pieces that may or may not directly relate. So, the closest is this landscape study with this moose painting. The foreground is exactly the same, but then the background is different. So he would take an animal, a foreground and a background, and combine them in his studio and make something that he thought was really cool. So that's why there's some snow pieces up here that you could talk about. There's that. Then there's some deadfall, just different things that color-wise might relate. That's what we tried to do. There's no direct landscape study for that, but you've got different trees, mountains, light, etc. There's also, this is also interesting because this is a study for one of the New York Zoological Society paintings. So if you want to tell that New York Zoological Society story in here, this is a good way to do that. But like I said, the black bear will be out there, the bison will be out there, and then the gray wolf from New York Zoological Society will probably be in conservation.
And then to go along with what Adam's saying, we kept this whole example of what was happening outside and where he was making all of those sketches. So the paint, his paint boxes, the whole plein air thing, which is also reflected on the timeline. The very first thing on the timeline here is that the paint tube was invented, which let people go outside. So, and then, all kinds of other interesting facts about what was happening during his lifetime. But this, I think, is a really good way to talk about what was happening with those big four and with, good examples of all of these sketches that he took back to New York to make big paintings.
Are they considered field sketches yet? Is that what?
Yeah. Field studies. And so we know that he did do these out in the field. Some of them he did also refine back in the studio.
Yeah.
But a lot of these, especially the ones with thumbtack holes, which you can see, are, they're clearly pinned down to something like that, and then he painted it out in the field. This is a little, I'll tell this story, then I'll go over there. So, if you get people over here, you can see this Lake O'Hara study, which hasn't been out in a really long time, is Lake O'Hara in a different light, but it directly ties to that. And then there's this other little Lake O'Hara right here. And then one of these is the mountains around Lake O'Hara. And we're going to figure out a way to let you know which each of these is. We just haven't done that yet. Because there are some that we know exactly what they are. Some are just like Canadian landscape, but some
How
we know
about
they're.
the center painting of the triptych? It's just not out, right?
So it's not out, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
Which one?
The center triptych used, and so there's room for a wet canvas right there, and then there's slots back there for other pieces of canvas that he would have carried around with him in the field. There's a great quote. He said, "You have to keep painting outdoors to capture the true colors of nature. If you just paint in the studios, your colors get too hot," or something like that. It's on that label. So you can really talk about that process, about the development of his style. So I hope that we captured most of the essential elements from the Rungus Gallery. And here you've got the Wyoming landscape. These are his actual paintbrushes. Those are recreations in there. That's his camera. These paint tubes are maybe similar to something he might have used, so they're not actually his as far as we know, but these paintbrushes are actually
Man,
his.
love that rifle.
So, the rifle is going to come back,
I know.
but we need to get a case for it, and so it'll be probably in
Great,
here
okay,
somewhere.
good.
I know, people will like the rifle.
Men like
The
that.
sheep
We'll get it
The
out.
what?
the sheep butt, the sculpture.
Yep, okay, so we're going to come out here. So if you didn't do what I just did, you could start Rungus from out here. You could do each gallery in a circle. You could do American, then European, then come out here and talk about those two paintings. Then come here and say, look this way. You've got Rungus's sculptures out here and the two sides of the Harlow triptych. We might have a little representation of what the triptych looked like. We wanted to put the big moose painting right there in the middle so you could get a sense of it, but it's just too big. So we put Northern King there instead, which is arguably as good or better a painting on its own. So yeah, you can say that this is an example of what the Harlow triptych kind of looked like. Once we get the didactic labels up, we're going to turn the sheep around, and that'll be another kind of funny thing, because you'll be walking down the gallery and you'll see the sheep butts, and that'll be something to talk about.
And we tried to take all of your
Yeah.
needs into account.
We really,
And
especially in this one, because I know that there's so much strong, passionate feelings about Rungus. So we really wanted to not downplay Rungus, but integrate him into the rest of the story and tell it with the essential pieces so that people could get a sense of it.
2 more.
Yep, we're doing great. We got 20 minutes. So.
2 more.
All of these galleries are painted the same color to demarcate that this is the permanent collection. The Pathways is all lighter blue. These are all this nice dark blue. Other changing exhibits will be back there, different colors, and it'll make a much better separation between what's our collection, what's changing, and hopefully if we can get the front desk to help us, we can get a really nice established route so that people go through the permanent collection first and then do changing exhibits last.
Is that the way you'd prefer us to do our tour?
Whatever you want. That's your choice. If somebody's here specifically to see Joel Sartori, you can go up the King Gallery or Pathways and end up back there at Joel Sartori. But before, when there were those two galleries, 3 would be changing and this would be permanent, people were going from here to there, to there, to there, and it just didn't make any sense.
Sometimes we start at the same time and we can't all
Yeah.
start in the same location.
So, what I really like about this being across from Rungus is what was happening at the same time as Rungus, Cooner, Lillefors, etc. were going out into the field and creating that kind of wildlife art. All these other artists, at the same time, were doing this kind of wildlife art. So the modernism as a movement was developing really strongly in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and this is the kind of ways that they were using wildlife in their imagery. So there's a different ways, different stories about what is wildlife art. And so I think it's really important to stress that. We can get to a point where we say Rungus was the epitome of wildlife art, and he laid down what it was to be from that point forward, but that's not true. There's all these different ways of thinking about what it is. So, starting off with Rousseau, which is one of the gems of this collection, going to the Jardin des Plantes, being an integral member of this crazy upstart group of artists in Paris, and again, being kind of self-taught painter who's painting these wild depictions, not based on going to India and seeing tigers, but going to the natural zoo in Paris. But then you get to see throughout this gallery that whole modernist emphasis on streamlining of forms, on flattened planes of perspective, on taking inspiration from nature but not trying to replicate or duplicate it. So, and that's a really important part. There's a nice line up there about this art instructor, Arthur Wesley Dow, who has instructed Georgia O'Keeffe, I think, told his students that instead of trying to copy nature, they should infuse their work with their own emotions, focusing on harmonious designs, blending line, mass, and color. So, you move away from I was out in the nature all summer to a different way of perceiving nature and integrating it into your work. There will be more didactics again in here. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can talk about later in the Swan, which I know is interesting to people. And tying in with the mythology, there's going to be mythology kind of stories about a lot of these pieces. Owls certainly have mythology later in the Swan. The Paul Manship, this is another Herculean story. You got Hercules out there. So that's another kind of series of things you could talk about as you move through. The kind of different piece in here is striking because it's very similar. The only contemporary piece in here is this, Jeffrey Dashwood. You can talk about the continuation of this line of wildlife art in a living artist like Dashwood who does this stuff. This looks perfectly at home in this installation, which I love about it. There's super tons of stuff to talk about in this gallery.
So, in my little 2 senses, we've got air travel, we have cities, we have cars, we have people going to the southwest on the map, we've got all kinds of other modern things happening on that timeline too. So please come, because we are a little short.
You got Art Nouveau, Art Deco, King's Tut tomb was found, and everyone went crazy for Egyptian stuff. So you got that sculpture, you got the bison sculpture. When the glass case goes in, right there, we'll probably have a more central island of sculptures that might bring Bugatti into this gallery, his school, some of those more modern influenced folks.
And I might just make a quick plug for when Western Visions is here, because we will feature all of the people who said yes from our permanent collection. It's going to be a fabulous, supportive narrative to tell. Like, some people can do it more traditionally,
right,
like Rungus and his crew, and other people do it like this.
Yeah.
Right? And so that amalgam and that what's going to feel like a cool mashup of all kinds of different styles of contemporary wildlife artists can be connected to this.
Yeah. This was all Bronwyn's doing right here. She didn't paint them, but we were out here figuring out how to organize coon in the rotunda, and Bronwyn said, why don't we just try the African suite and see how it looks? And it looks great, and it's gotten a huge reaction since then. So if you want another equation, you can say Carl Rungus plus Mark Rothko equals Bob Kuhn. So if you take Rungus and modernism, what develops out of that, you get somebody exactly like Kuhn, who took influences from all these different places, including modern art, and then melded them into his own individual, unique style. So over there will be a really cool video
Right here.
that we had in the Kuhn exhibit, which is him at a fairly advanced age creating a canvas that his granddaughter Carrie put together that went on the tour that we did of his works. So there'll be a little video element there, that little kind of didactic about Kuhn, and then some more kind of info stuff. about each of these paintings. It also kind of takes the global reach that we were talking about in terms of the big four, and shows how Kuhn continued in that tradition. So he didn't just paint North American animals. He went all over the place and painted animals wherever he could find them. So that might be another interesting way to talk about the history of the museum, moving from Wildlife of the American West to the National Museum of Wildlife Art, which covers a much broader scope of what wildlife art is. This will be, for the summer through November, Conservation Gallery with Andy Warhol. Because their work's on paper and they can't be in the light all the time, otherwise they would eventually fade into nothingness, we can't show them all the time. So we pick specific, impactful times to show them, and so this summer, our 30th anniversary seemed like a great time. So these will be down in November, and then most likely we'll put up the bigger pieces that I was talking about that came out of Widener and the Gray Wolf. This is still the centerpiece of the exhibit. This is the quote from Steve is up there on the wall. I hope that people read it and connect it to this. And then the video will be over there, that had been over there, that has, the question, is this bird dead or alive? So all those things still are going to happen in this gallery. And then Bronwyn has cool stickers on there.
The map and the timeline in this gallery, come on in guys,
Yeah.
smush into the corner so you can see what I'm talking about. Because this room is about conservation, wildlife, and art, this timeline is about the conservation movement with some other crazy things in there, and the map has general location of all of these animals that Warhol made prints of and their status. So it tells how many are in the wild, and it tells how they are on the endangered species spectrum. So, for example, let's see, we've got, like the bald eagle was doing pretty badly for a while, but now it's least concern. I can't remember. I'm going to make another little key that shows the whole endangered species, whatever the right word is, key for that. We've got the Pine Barrens tree frog, which is threatened. The population is unknown. So all of the animals in this room, you can check out, oh, they're from that part of the world, and the African elephant is vulnerable, and there are 415,000 in the wild. So critically endangered black rhino, population 5,000 in the wild. So there's information about what this is talking about on this map. And then this timeline talks about, when the Endangered Species Act was created. And then it has some other really interesting things on it. So when the first digital camera was sold to the public. When we started really obsessing about Animal Planet TV channel, when we, let's see, what else? Some extinction, color TV in the 50s, Jane Goodall's primate research. So that kind of information that relates to conservation and art. The museum got these partially with partial money from Collector's Circle in 2006. It's is it 10?
Yep. These
10 in this series, and then the one behind Adam is another work, but it's not part of that series.
Oh.
And he was commissioned to do it by a wildlife, somebody in Long Island, a wildlife...
dealers in New York.
Oh, I thought it was
They came up with this plan to do an endangered species portfolio. As a new subject for him to kind of do. He did donate several sets of these to different conservation organizations to auction off and to raise some money. So there was some altruistic benefit to it. But it also was, another money-making operation for him. You can still find individual ones of these on the market today, but it's very rare to find a complete set. And so when we bought these, we were incredibly lucky that this is one set of 10. that was all together that we were able to purchase. It's really nice.
And
And then this is a single piece that he did a couple of years later. There's a book and a film that came out at the same time.
Yeah, and he did them in 1983. And we'll try to have a little more information about him there
Yep.
with one of our cool labels, icon labels.
Yeah. And then we'll end down here. And then actually we'll go through that way and I'll show you what we did in there. Oh, and in here. Okay.
I like the whole ring.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, we're really happy with how this turned out. I would like to, the last time we did this was over a decade ago.
Yeah.
So I would like to try not to wait another decade, to do it again. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more flexible than it was in the past. And hopefully the installations, you'll see things coming and going a little bit. There's a big Bierstadt show and we're lending 3 paintings. So things will come in and out, but they will be within the timeline and within the theme of that section. So, as always. So we end here at the end of Pathways. We started with You Are Here, and we're ending with contemporary wildlife art. And so we can just talk about the ways that artists are using animals today in a variety of ways. Imaginative, relying on, again, sort of a biblical passage with this one, thou shalt not reap the corners of thy field. Taking a trip out into nature, but then using that experience to create something almost completely out of the imagination. And then this most recent piece from Collector Circle last year, it's part of a 4 Seasons series, so this is fall. Also, though, involves mythology. There's the owl, which is the symbol of wisdom. So this will be another piece in that story that we tell about cultural narratives. What does the owl mean? What does it mean that it's in fall with the snow starting to fall? Also, where does this guy get his inspiration? From kaleidoscopes, for one. From street art, from graffiti, stencils, etc. What I noticed the other day, which would be fun for you to look at, if you stand right outside the Widener Gallery and look at Leda and the Swan, all the leaves and the foliage that he did in the background of that, and then you look down here at this, you can see some really cool parallels to that. So there's all kinds of things that you can talk about. The penguins were a huge hit at Blacktail Gala. So we're also talking about these contemporary art programs that we have and the different ways that this collection is growing and the different things that people are doing today with wildlife. So there's traditional, there's contemporary, there's modern, there's all kinds of stuff that's happening. It's a really exciting time for wildlife art, and so we want to reflect that in what we display on a more permanent basis. Then, as a side note, Ray dismantled the false wall that was in the Artist Theater that used to hold an entire enormous big screen TV with one of those huge tubes that was 3 feet deep. So this gallery is much bigger now and will be used for videos, like videos that we've collected recently. Joel Sartori, that exhibit, has a whole kind of video screen that'll be in there. But now we can use it for smaller exhibits, works on paper, all kinds of different fun stuff can happen in there at this juncture.
And we now have quite a few video works in the collection, so we will hopefully be going through some of those in that gallery.
You might think about, there's a whole bunch of animals around this area, to have a whole series of pictures, photographs of the various animals around it,
Yeah.
that they could see what the local.
Right. Yeah.
I think you could get some really good pictures.
Yeah. Well, are there any other questions about this? All right, we'll go back through that door, and then we can talk about the construction that we did. Simple explanation is that we took the nameplate off the Rungus Gallery and we moved it over there, and we took the nameplate off of Changing Visions and we moved it over there. So that's Changing Visions, That's rungus. This is still bison. But bison is now connected to changing visions in a way that it wasn't quite connected before. So this whole space can be our changing exhibits area. Or this can be an exhibit, and that can be an exhibit. The King Gallery will still be used for what it used to be used for. What we did was we opened that wall up, and we closed this wall in. So there used to be an entryway right there. So we had this connection between these three. Now we've got these two. We're going to try to get more changeable, movable walls so that this whole thing can be reconfigured into different ways. And I think it's going to be really interesting. If people ask, you can say that when this museum opened, that was the changing exhibit space. It used to be called the Showcase Gallery. And that's where changing exhibits happened. It makes a ton of sense from our perspective because you don't want to be dragging artwork through the building all the time, especially when you're changing exhibits. Changing exhibit space is usually near the back, and so that's where it is now, and I think it's going to work. This and King will be Western Visions. So, and this space equals pretty much what these three spaces used to equal. So.
Why the choice of black?
So black is for Joel Sartori. National Geographic said, please paint the walls black. And so I think it's going to look really cool with the Joel Sartori photographs. Yeah. Because the Joel Sartoris are all studio kind of portraits. So they're not portraits of animals in the wild. They're on black backgrounds or white backgrounds. And so I think they're going to look really, really interesting in here. All right. Out here, what we're working on is the bison heads will go back up behind the front desk. So they'll add that art element behind the front desk again. And then you've noticed that the Rungus black bear has moved out here. So you've got a little bit different things to talk about in Johnston Hall. The gray wolf will most likely go, I can't promise this, but it will most likely go into the conservation gallery installation when Warhols come down. Because you can't have Warhol up all the time because their work's on paper. So those will be up through November. They'll go away. And then we're going to try to put some of the larger paintings that we took down from Widener into that gallery. So the Cooner elephants, the polar bear, gray wolf, which all tie really well into that theme of conservation. So that'll be, I think, a really fun place to talk about those. We just had a question about the totem pole. There will be some 5 or 6 foot tall sheets of glass that go around the bottom to protect it, because that's now a very active food service area. Other than that, out here, but minor things like that gray paint, they're going to paint this next section so that that'll really feel like that's all part of the restaurant over there, kind of draw you in, etc. You saw we moved these nice Anna Hyatt Huntingtons out here. We're working on some lighting solutions, so they'll be a little bit better lit up, but I think they were originally kind of fence posts, so markers of going into a place, and I think they work really well for that in this instance too.